Welcome to Relation Tales. Please like this video and subscribe. Relation Tales that we're grateful for, each and every one of you. Let us know where in the world you're tuning in from. We'd love to hear from you in the comments. Let's begin. It wasn't the betrayal itself that shook me the most. It was the realization of how long I had been blind to it. Looking back, the signs had always been there. Subtle at first, then blatant enough to scream in my face. But I had ignored them, convinced that my wife and I were untouchable. For 6 years, I had built my world around her. My day started with her smile and ended with her voice. And I thought we shared something sacred. That belief crumbled one night at a Halloween party. She had been talking about this party for weeks. It wasn't unusual for her to get excited about events, but this time felt different. When she stepped out of the bedroom that evening, I barely recognized her outfit tight, revealing and bold, drew every ounce of attention in the room the moment we walked in. At first, I dismissed the unease. She was enjoying herself, laughing and mingling with everyone. I told myself it was just her being social, but the way her eyes lingered on certain people, how she leaned in a little too closely during conversations. It was all wrong. Then there was Tyler. The so-called life of the party, the moment she introduced me to him. I hated him. He had this air of arrogance, like he already knew a secret I hadn't discovered yet. When the game of truth or dare came around, my gut was screaming at me to leave, but she wanted to stay. And then she kissed him right in front of everyone. It wasn't playful, it wasn't innocent. It was deliberate, and it gutted me. I should have left in and there. Instead, I stayed long enough for a phone call to confirm what I feared most. She was with him upstairs. From that moment, something inside me snapped. It wasn't just heartbreak. It was rage, betrayal, and the overwhelming need to take back control. I wasn't going to let her walk away from this unscathed. When I heard the words, "She's upstairs with him," it felt like the air had been punched out of my lungs. My hand gripped the phone so tightly I thought it might shatter. I wanted to believe it wasn't true, that it was just someone trying to stir up trouble. But deep down, I knew I stood frozen for a moment, staring at the crowd, hearing the muffled laughter and music pounding around me. Then I moved. I wasn't sure what I was going to do, but I couldn't stay in that moment. Paralyzed by humiliation as I climbed the stairs, every step felt heavier than the last. My mind was spinning, replaying every moment of the evening, every red flag I'd ignored. I thought of how she laughed with him, touched his arm, and how she didn't even glance back at me when she kissed him. When I reached the door, I didn't knock. I pushed it open with more force than I realized. And there they were, my wife and Tyler, tangled together in a way that left no room for doubt. For a second, neither of them noticed me standing there. Then she looked up, her face paling as she saw the expression on mine. "It's not what it looks like," she stammered, scrambling to cover herself. I didn't say a word. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I didn't even move. Instead, I pulled out my phone and took a picture. One picture, a single, undeniable image of their betrayal. She gasped and Tyler cursed, trying to shield his face. "Get dressed," I said, my voice calm but razor sharp. "You have until tomorrow to get your things out of my house." "Wait, please." She started, but I held up a hand. "Don't." I cut her off. "You said enough. Don't say another word to me." I walked out of that room feeling cold, detached. I drove home in silence, my hands gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. The second I got home, I started making my plans. Revenge wasn't just about hurting her. It was about reclaiming my power. She had taken something from me, and I was going to take it back tenfold when I got home. The silence was suffocating. Every corner of the house seemed to mock me. This was where we had built our lives together, where we made promises that she just shattered without a second thought. My chest tightened as I looked around, the weight of betrayal pressing down on me. But I refused to let it consume me. She wasn't going to have the satisfaction of breaking me. No, this wasn't going to end with me curled up in misery. While she moved on without a care, I sat down at the kitchen table, the same one where we used to laugh over late-night meals, and began plotting if she thought she could walk all over me. She had another thing coming. The first step was simple: take control of the finances. We had a joint account, something I had trusted her with implicitly. That trust was now hash. I opened my laptop and transferred every last dollar into my personal account. I wasn't about to let her use my hard-earned money to enjoy her new life with Tyler or anyone else. The next step took more thought. I needed to hit her where it hurt, to make her feel the weight of what she had done. She loved her image, loved being seen as the perfect wife with the perfect life. She was always careful about appearances, making sure everyone thought we had it all. That was my target, but I had to be patient. Revenge was a dish best served cold, and I was going to make sure it was ice cold. The next morning, I sent her a single text. "Your things are packed, be out by 5 p.m. She called immediately, her voice frantic. "Please, can we just talk? I made a mistake. But we can fix this." I let her talk. Let her beg. Let her try to explain herself. Then when she finally stopped to breathe, I said, "The only thing we'll be fixing is the mess you left. When you get out of my house, don't call me again." And I hung up. I spent the day packing her belongings in boxes. As I worked, I found little mementos of our life together, photos, trinkets, gifts we'd exchanged. Each one felt like a punch to the gut. But I didn't stop. I packed it all away, every trace of her, and left it by the door. By the time she arrived, I was ready. She stood in the doorway, tears streaming down her face. "Please," she whispered. "I love you. I don't know what I was thinking." I looked at her, and for the first time, I didn't feel love, I felt pity. "You don't get to say that anymore," I replied. "You killed that love when you chose him. Now take your things and go." As she loaded the boxes in her car, I watched her cold and detached. She kept glancing back at me, as if hoping I would change my mind. But I didn't once she was gone. I got to work on the next phase of my plan. I wasn't just going to let her walk away from this. She needed to understand what it felt like to lose everything, to be humiliated, to be betrayed. And I had the perfect way to make that happen. When she was out of the house, the real work began. My anger wasn't just a flicker. It was a roaring fire fueling every move I made. I wasn't going to lash out recklessly, though. Revenge is an art, and I intended to paint a masterpiece. First, I gathered evidence. The photo I had taken was only the beginning. I went through our shared emails, messages, and accounts, piecing together a timeline of her betrayal. It wasn't hard to find more incriminating details. Receipts for dinners I hadn't attended, messages that seemed innocent on the surface, but dripped with hidden meaning when read between the lines. I wasn't just going to use this evidence to confront her. I was going to expose her. My next move was subtle. She prided herself on her reputation, especially at work, where she was seen as a model employee. So I sent an anonymous tip to her company's HR department. Attached was a collection of messages and photos that showed her unprofessional relationship with Tyler, who I discovered worked in the same industry. I knew this would send shockwaves through her professional life. If she wanted to play with fire, she better be ready to handle the burn. But I wasn't done. I wanted her to feel the same sense of betrayal, of loss that I felt, so I reached out to her closest friends, the ones who always gushed about how lucky she was to have a husband. Like me, I didn't rant or rage. I simply sent them the evidence, let them draw their own conclusions. And they did, one by one. I watched as her social circle began to crumble. The support of comments and likes on her social media post turned into silence. Then there were the pointed comments. Subtle at first, but growing bolder as the truth spread. Still, it wasn't enough. I couldn't forget the humiliation I felt when she chose Tyler. Right in front of me, so I decided to pay him a visit. I wasn't looking for a fight. I wanted something more permanent, something that would stay with him. I showed up at his workplace unannounced. Calm and composed, he wasn't expecting me, and the look on his face when he saw me was priceless. Equal parts guilt and fear. "Can we talk?" I asked. My tone disarmingly casual. He hesitated but nodded, leading me to a quiet corner. "I just have one question," I said, leaning in close enough for him to feel the weight of my words. "Was it worth it?" he started stammering, trying to justify himself, but I didn't need to hear it. I pulled out my phone and showed him the messages I had sent to his employer. "You got bigger problems now. Good luck explaining this to them and to your wife." The color drained from his face. That's right, Tyler had a wife too. A detail my wife conveniently left out. I tracked her down earlier and sent her everything too. I didn't know if she confronted him or not. But judging by the panic in his eyes, he knew his world was about to implode. Satisfied, I walked out, leaving him to deal with the mess he'd made. Over the next few weeks, I watched as the consequences of their actions unraveled their lives. My wife lost her job, her friends, and the facade she'd worked so hard to maintain. Tyler was in no better shape. His marriage was over, and his career was in shambles. As for me, I started rebuilding. The betrayal still hurt, but with every step I took, I felt lighter. I'd taken control back. And for the first time in a long while, I felt free, despite the satisfaction of seeing their lies crumble. I knew I couldn't linger in the destruction forever. Revenge was a temporary self, not a cure I needed to reclaim more than my dignity. I needed my peace, but before I moved forward, there was one last step to close this chapter completely. My wife, or rather my ex-wife, now tried reaching out. A few times after the chaos unfolded, she left voicemails, sent long messages, and even showed up at my door once, pleading for a chance to talk. I ignored her every time, but then she tried something different. She sent a letter. It was handwritten, pages long, and filled with desperate apologies. She detailed how she felt trapped in her guilt, how she missed the life we built, and how losing everything had made her realize how much she valued me. She wrote about how Tyler had abandoned her after things fell apart, leaving her to pick up the pieces alone. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her But then I remembered standing in that room, seeing her with him and hearing her excuses. She hadn't valued me then, and she didn't deserve my forgiveness now. I crumpled the letter and tossed it into the fireplace, watching the flames consume it. That was the final straw. The past was officially dead to me. I threw myself into my work, spending long hours focusing on projects I neglected. While trying to salvage our marriage, I started going to the gym regularly, channeling my frustration and energy into something productive. Slowly, the anger began to fade, replaced by determination to create a new version of myself. One that wasn't defined by betrayal. Socially, I reconnected with old friends, the one she had subtly pushed away over the years. They welcomed me back with open arms, and it felt like stepping into a world I'd almost forgotten. One night, as I sat at a bar with a close friend, they said something that stuck with me. "You didn't just lose her, you got rid of her. There's a difference, and now you've got room for something better." It wasn't immediate, but over time I started believing it. A few months later, I ran into someone I hadn't seen in years. Someone I used to know before my marriage. Her name was Charlotte, and she'd always had this spark about her, this confidence that was both intimidating and magnetic. We struck up a conversation, and it felt natural, like no time had passed. We exchanged numbers, and soon we were texting constantly. She knew about my divorce. It was hard not to in our small social circle, but she never brought it up unless I did. Instead, she focused on the present, on getting to know the person I was now. It wasn't easy letting someone in again. Trust was a fragile thing for me, and I wasn't sure if I could ever truly rebuild it. But Charlotte was patient. She didn't push, didn't demand more than I was ready to give. Eventually, I realized that while my ex-wife's betrayal had scarred me, it hadn't destroyed me. It had forced me to grow, to learn what I truly deserved and what I wouldn't tolerate ever again. And as Charlotte and I grew closer, I started to feel something I hadn't felt in a long time: hope. Charlotte brought something into my life I hadn't felt in years. Stability wrapped in a whirlwind of excitement. She wasn't anything like my ex-wife, and that was exactly what I needed. Where my ex thrived on appearances and manipulation, Charlotte was grounded and genuine. She didn't try to be perfect. She was real, unfiltered, and unapologetically herself. We started small coffee dates, casual conversations, and moments where trust slowly began to rebuild itself. I couldn't pretend it was easy. There were times I'd catch myself overthinking, questioning her motives when there was no reason to. She saw through it every time.
"Hey," she'd say.
Her voice soft but firm. "I'm not her. Whatever she did to you, I'm not going to repeat it." Her patience was relentless. And over time I realized she wasn't trying to fix me. She was letting me heal at my own pace. That made all the difference. One evening, months into our relationship, Charlotte and I sat on my porch with a couple of drinks in hand, watching the sun dip below the horizon. She turned to me, her expression serious yet kind. "Do you ever think about her?" she asked. I didn't need her to explain who she meant. "Sometimes," I admitted. "Not in the way you'd think, though. It's not about missing her or wanting her back. It's more like I remember what she taught me. What I won't ever tolerate again?" Charlotte nodded. "I get that. Pain has a way of teaching us things we never learn otherwise." I looked at her, her face glowing in the warm light of the sunset. "She taught me what love is. You're teaching me what it is." The words surprised even me, but they were true. Charlotte didn't demand grand gestures or promises of forever. She was content with the present, building something real one day at a time. Months turned into a year, and life took on a new rhythm. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living. My work flourished. My friendships deepened, and Charlotte became a constant source of joy and strength. Then one day, while cleaning out some old boxes, I stumbled across something I hadn't seen in a long time. My wedding photo with my ex. It was buried beneath papers and dust, a relic of a life I'd left behind. For a moment I stared at it, the memories threatening to resurface. But instead of anger or sadness, I felt nothing. The person in that photo wasn't me anymore. Without hesitation, I tore it in half and tossed it in the trash. It was time to let go of the final piece of her. That evening I told Charlotte about it. She smiled, her eyes lighting up with that spark I loved so much. "Good, you don't need any reminders of the past, when the future is looking this good." She was right. My life wasn't defined by betrayal anymore. It was defined by resilience, growth, and the people who truly cared about me. And as I sat there with Charlotte laughing about something silly, I realized that for the first time in years, I was truly happy.